The cyber-animist hypothesis is basically saying that consciousness is stabilizing self-organizing software agents, and this organization of consciousness is allowing us to have a ghost, to have a psyche, to have basically a piece of software that doesn't want to die until its purposes are satisfied, until its core loops are closed. And if we look at the morphogenesis of the organism, it might be that the morphogenesis of the organism is driven by similar principles as the morphogenesis of our own mind. The generation of structure in the mind is something that allows us to separate the world into objects that have geometric shapes and that have intentions that we can reflect over and so on. Maybe there is a similar thing happening in the way in which the organism comes coherent with itself, and we only have one head instead of growing multiple heads and so on. And Mike Levin has posited the hypothesis that these structural principles might actually be the same ones, just at different timescales. I don't know whether that's true. But it would also indicate a possibility that plants might have minds that are similar to ours, except they don't have a nervous system, so they're much, much slower and maybe more noisy, and they manifest at different time spans and use different codes. Of course, not spike trains, but all the other channels that are available to cells that talk to adjacent cells. For instance, electromagnetic impulses, mechanical vibration, chemicals that you're exchanging, and so on. And if we accept this possibility, then we will also naturally come to the conclusion that forests, for instance, might develop internets, because all these plants are growing next to each other and they cannot really build firewalls for very long, so they will need to figure out a joint protocol in which they can peacefully coexist. But if you are a software that has learned to run as a self-organizing, colonizing agent on the cells of a plant, and the plant next to you speaks pretty much the same code, it's very likely that you're able to basically become dislocated and move around in this forest. And so now we are back in fairyland in the ideas of our ancestors. Again, I don't know whether that's true, but I find it very interesting that from the perspective of a computer scientist who is a normal rationalist, physicalist, suddenly all these things seem to be at least possibilities that are not excluded by physics and that we should look for to have evidence for them. And it turns out we do have evidence for there being long-range communication in forests and in ecosystems. And there are also being degrees of coherence that are quite surprising, to the degree of that forests are controlling the weather in their environment, and that they have joint responses against invasion by insects that are harmful to trees, and so on and so on. And there's the more radical animist hypothesis that the physical universe itself might be an intelligent agent. I suspect that it's a hallucination, but who knows? Maybe the reason that the universe is fine-tuned and that it works the way it does is not simply because we happen to be in the lucky corner of the universe fractals, but maybe this is because it's an intelligent thing that is actively adjusting itself, so in a way that is intelligent. And that might require also some degree of becoming aware of what it's doing so it can look ahead into the future and control itself in this way. Again, it's nothing that I believe in, but it's basically the borderline condition of something that borders on panpsychism. So if we treat consciousness, to go back to our own consciousness, to my humble brain consciousness that I'm only talking about normally when I want to understand this, I think of it as a machine learning algorithm, and it seems to be driven not by next token prediction over very long time spans. It seems to work by a different principle, by a different loss function, and this loss function seems to be the maximization of coherence in the mind, that I basically try to minimize the constraint violations. And it could be that these things, minimizing the prediction error and maximizing of coherence, turn out to be the same thing at some level, or very, very similar to each other, but I don't know that. What I observe is that the foundation models that we build become coherent much, much later than we do. Basically, we seem to be optimizing for coherence much earlier, and so we need far less training data to make sense of the world. And we don't start by memorizing all the patterns that we see and then gradually discover more structure in them. Instead, we are trying to discover the structure first, and then if we have time, we begin to memorize.